Marcus Thompson sat in the mahogany-paneled law office, his worn jeans and faded flannel shirt making him feel like an intruder among the expensive suits surrounding him. His step-family occupied the plush leather chairs with the confidence of people who had never doubted their place in the world. Victoria, his stepmother, adjusted her pearl necklace and shot him a look that could freeze water. Her twin sons, Bradley and Preston, whispered between themselves, occasionally glancing his way with barely concealed smirks. The lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, cleared his throat and began reading from the thick document before him. Marcus had barely spoken to his father, Robert Thompson, in the 5 years before his death. Their relationship had crumbled when Robert remarried Victoria just 2 years after Marcus's mother died of cancer. The new family had made it clear that Marcus, then barely 18, was an unwelcome reminder of the past. "To my beloved wife Victoria," Mr. Whitmore read, his voice echoing in the silent room, "I leave the family home at 1247 Maple Drive, valued at $800,000. Victoria's painted lips curved into a satisfied smile. She reached over and squeezed Bradley's hand, her diamond rings catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. "To my stepsons Bradley and Preston Thompson," the lawyer continued, "I leave my business, Thompson Construction, with all assets, equipment, and ongoing contracts, valued at approximately $2.3 million. The twins exchanged triumphant glances, and Preston actually chuckled under his breath. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. The reading continued with smaller bequests to distant relatives and longtime employees. Marcus noticed how his stepfamily's confidence grew with each passing minute. They had orchestrated this moment perfectly, he realized. During his father's final illness, they had carefully managed who had access to the dying man. Marcus's few attempts to visit had been met with excuses about his father being too tired or too medicated to see anyone. "And finally," Mr. Whitmore said, his eyes finding Marcus across the room, "to my son Marcus Thompson I leave the sum of $1. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Bradley snorted, trying to suppress his laughter. Preston wasn't as diplomatic. He burst into open laughter, slapping his knee dramatically. $1 whole, Preston wheezed between laughs. "Dad always said Uncle Robert had a sense of humor, but this is priceless." Victoria's smile was razor-sharp as she looked at Marcus with mock sympathy. "Oh, sweetheart," she said in a voice dripping with false concern, "I do hope you can make ends meet with such a generous inheritance. Perhaps you should frame it instead of spending it." The twins erupted into fresh laughter, and even some of the distant relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus felt his face burn with humiliation, but something in Mr. Whitmore's expression stopped him from standing up and walking out. The elderly lawyer was watching him with an intensity that seemed oddly significant, his fingers drumming silently against the desk as he waited for the laughter to subside. Mr. Whitmore waited until the room fell silent again before speaking. "However," he said, his voice cutting through the lingering chuckles like a blade, "there is one additional matter." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, its expensive cream-colored paper bearing Marcus's name in his father's distinctive handwriting. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "What additional matter?" she asked, her voice sharp with sudden concern. The will was quite clear about the distribution of assets. Her fingers worried at her pearl necklace, a nervous habit Marcus remembered from the early days of her marriage to his father. "Your husband included specific instructions," Mr. Whitmore replied, his tone professional but somehow weighted with meaning. "This envelope is to be opened only in Marcus's presence, and its contents are for him alone." He extended the envelope toward Marcus, who rose on unsteady legs to accept it. Bradley leaned forward in his chair, his earlier amusement replaced by suspicion. "What kind of instructions? Everything should be transparent. We're family." The word family sounded bitter in his mouth, especially directed at Marcus, whom they had spent years making feel like an outsider. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and what appeared to be a small metal key. His father's handwriting filled the page, and as Marcus read, his eyes widened in disbelief. The letter was brief but devastating in its implications. "What does it say?" Preston demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Come on, read it out loud. We all heard the will." But Marcus was staring at the key, recognition dawning on his face. He remembered this key from his childhood. His father had worn it on a chain around his neck, claiming it was for an old safety deposit box from his military days. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat again. "The letter contains information about a safety deposit box in Geneva, Switzerland. Box number 7749 at the Union Bank of Switzerland. Mr. Thompson established this account during his military service and has been making deposits for over 30 years. The lawyer's words fell into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and disbelief. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Robert told me about all his accounts. We've been married for 15 years. There are no secrets between us." But even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice. She was remembering small things now. Mysterious phone calls her husband had taken in private, unexplained absences he'd attributed to business trips, his insistence on handling certain financial matters personally. "The account," Mr. Whitmore continued, consulting his notes, "was established as a trust for Marcus Thompson, to be accessed upon his father's death or his 25th birthday, whichever came first. Marcus was 26 now, having been shut out of his father's life during those crucial years. The current balance as of last month is approximately $4.7 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Preston's mouth hung open, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and panic. Bradley had gone rigid in his seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. Victoria was the first to find her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. 4.7 million. She stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a soft thud. That's impossible. Robert would have told me. We shared everything, every account, every investment, every financial decision. Her voice grew stronger, more desperate. This has to be some kind of mistake. Mr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses and consulted the thick folder before him. I'm afraid there's no mistake, Mrs. Thompson. Your husband established this account in 1987, well before your marriage. He made regular deposits, often substantial ones, particularly after the success of his construction business. The lawyer's tone remained professionally neutral, but Marcus caught a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Bradley shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is fraud," he declared, pointing an accusing finger at Marcus. "He manipulated a sick old man. Dad was on medication. He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end." His voice rose with each word, drawing concerned looks from the other beneficiaries scattered around the room. "Your stepfather was of sound mind when he established this trust," Mr. Whitmore replied calmly. "In fact, he updated the account information just 6 months ago, well before his final illness. He also left specific instructions that no one else was to be informed of its existence until after his death." The lawyer paused, studying the faces around the room. He was quite adamant about this point. Preston had gone very quiet, his mind clearly racing. Unlike his more volatile twin, he was calculating the implications. "Wait," he said slowly. "If Dad had nearly $5 million sitting in Switzerland, why didn't he use it to expand the business? We could have been so much bigger, taken on major commercial projects." His voice carried a note of betrayal, as if he were only now realizing how much his stepfather had kept hidden. Marcus looked down at the letter again, his father's words blurring as tears of emotion filled his eyes. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Son, I know I failed you after your mother died. I let grief and loneliness cloud my judgment, and I allowed others to push you away when I should have fought for you. This money represents every major success I've had since you were born. Every big contract, every profitable year. I put aside what should have been yours by right. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old man who forgot what really mattered." The letter continued with details about the account, access codes, and contact information for the Swiss bank. But it was the final paragraph that broke Marcus's heart. "I tried many times to reach out to you these past years, but I was always told you didn't want to see me. I hope that wasn't true, but if it was, I understand. I hope this money can give you the life your mother and I always dreamed you'd have." Victoria noticed Marcus wiping his eyes and moved closer, her predatory instincts sharpening. "What else does that letter say? If Robert mentioned me or the boys, we have a right to know." She reached for the paper, but Marcus pulled it away, folding it carefully and putting it in his shirt pocket along with the key. "The letter is personal," Marcus said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's between my father and me." He turned to Mr. Whitmore, who was watching the family drama unfold with the detached interest of someone who had seen similar scenes play out countless times before. "What do I need to do to access the account?" Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "Personal," she shrieked, her carefully cultivated upper-class accent slipping to reveal the harsh tones of her working-class origins. "That money should be part of the estate. We've been struggling to keep the business afloat, living modestly while he was hoarding millions in some foreign bank." Her hands shook as she pointed at Marcus, her diamond rings catching the light like small weapons. "Actually," Mr. Whitmore interjected smoothly, "the account was established as an irrevocable trust with Marcus as the sole beneficiary. It was never part of Mr. Thompson's estate, and therefore not subject to probate or division among heirs." He pulled out another document, this one bearing official Swiss banking seals. "Your husband was quite thorough in ensuring the money would go directly to his son." Bradley and Preston exchanged panicked glances. The construction business they had just inherited was profitable, but it also carried substantial debt and ongoing obligations. They had been counting on their stepfather's personal assets to provide a comfortable cushion as they learned to run the company. The house, while valuable, was mortgaged, and the business equipment was financed. "This isn't over," Bradley declared, his voice shaking with rage. "We'll contest this. Dad wasn't in his right mind, and this proves it. No one hides millions of dollars from their family unless they're mentally incompetent." He turned to his mother, seeking support. "Mom, call Uncle Richard. We need a lawyer. A real lawyer, not some small-town family attorney." Mr. Whitmore's expression hardened slightly. "I've been practicing estate law for 37 years, young man. I assure you that your stepfather's wishes were clearly expressed and legally sound. The trust was established and maintained through one of the most reputable banks in the world, with proper documentation at every step." He gathered the papers before him with deliberate precision. Any attempt to contest it would be both expensive and futile. Preston slumped back in his chair, the full weight of their situation beginning to sink in. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you realize what this means? We thought we were inheriting millions, but it's mostly just debt and obligations. The house has a mortgage, the business equipment is financed, and now we find out Dad had been keeping nearly $5 million secret from us for decades." Victoria's face cycled through emotions: shock, rage, disbelief, and finally, a cold, calculating fury that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. This was the woman who had slowly but systematically erased his presence from his father's life, who had made him feel unwelcome at every family gathering until he stopped coming altogether. "You," she said, her voice low and venomous as she focused on Marcus, "you did this somehow. You manipulated him, probably when he was dying and vulnerable. That money should go to his real family, people who loved him and took care of him." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a lifetime of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. "Real family," he repeated, his tone quietly dangerous. "You mean the family that told him I didn't want to see him when he was dying? The family that changed the locks on the house I grew up in while I was at my mother's funeral?" His voice grew stronger with each word, years of hurt and frustration pouring out. The room fell silent except for the soft ticking of an antique clock on Mr. Whitmore's desk. Several of the other beneficiaries shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. The distant relatives who had received small bequests watched the family drama unfold with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Bradley and Preston both looked uncomfortable, remembering the lies they had helped tell over the years. They had intercepted phone calls, discarded letters, and created an elaborate fiction that Marcus wanted nothing to do with his father. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Perhaps this is an appropriate time to mention that Mr. Thompson left additional instructions." He reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a small digital recorder. "He asked me to play this recording only if there were any disputes about his intentions regarding the Swiss account." Victoria's face went white. "Robert made a recording," she whispered, sinking back into her chair. Bradley and Preston exchanged terrified glances, both remembering conversations they had assumed were private, moments when they had revealed their true feelings about their stepbrother and their plans for his inheritance. "Your husband was very thorough," Mr. Whitmore confirmed, his finger hovering over the play button. He began documenting his concerns about family dynamics approximately 2 years ago, when he started to suspect that Marcus's absence wasn't entirely voluntary. The lawyer looked around the room, his gaze settling on each member of the Step family in turn. "Shall I proceed?" Marcus found himself torn between vindication and sadness. Part of him wanted to hear his father's voice again, to know that the man had finally seen through the manipulation and lies. But another part of him just wanted to leave, to escape this toxic environment and start processing what he had learned. The money, while shocking, was less important than the knowledge that his father had never stopped thinking about him. "Play it," he said quietly. "I want to hear what he had to say." Victoria made a small, strangled sound of protest, but it was too late. Mr. Whitmore pressed the button, and Robert Thompson's voice filled the room, slightly weakened by illness but still carrying the authority that had made him a successful businessman. "If you're hearing this recording," his father's voice said, "it means I'm gone and there's been some kind of dispute about Marcus's inheritance. I want to make something perfectly clear to anyone who might be listening." Robert Thompson's voice continued from the small speaker, each word falling into the silent room like a hammer blow. "I've been documenting certain behaviors in my household for the past 2 years, ever since I began to notice that my son Marcus never returned my phone calls or responded to my letters. At first, I thought he was still angry about my remarriage, and he had every right to be. I handled things poorly after his mother died." Victoria had pressed her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with growing horror. Bradley and Preston sat frozen, both realizing that their carefully constructed lies were about to be exposed in their stepfather's own words. "However," the recording continued, "I began to grow suspicious when Marcus never acknowledged birthday cards I sent, or when he failed to respond to my invitation to reconcile during my cancer scare 3 years ago. I decided to investigate." There was a pause, filled only by the soft whir of the recording device. "What I discovered was deeply disturbing." Mr. Whitmore glanced around the room, noting how the step-family members seemed to be shrinking into their chairs. The other beneficiaries looked uncomfortable but fascinated, like witnesses to a family secret they had never expected to hear. "I hired a private investigator," Robert's voice revealed, causing Victoria to gasp audibly. "I learned that Marcus had been attempting to contact me regularly, phone calls that were intercepted, letters that were discarded, even visits to the hospital that were turned away with claims that I was too ill to see anyone. My wife and stepsons had systematically cut my son out of my life, then convinced me that he wanted nothing to do with me." The silence in the room was deafening. Preston had gone completely pale, while Bradley's hands were clenched into fists. Victoria looked as though she might be sick, her carefully applied makeup starting to streak as perspiration beaded on her forehead. "The investigator provided me with phone records, witness statements, and even security footage from the hospital showing Marcus being turned away during my chemotherapy treatments. My own family, people I trusted, had been lying to me for years, keeping me from the one person I most wanted to see." Robert's voice grew stronger, filled with a cold anger that Marcus had rarely heard from his normally gentle father. "Victoria, Bradley, Preston, if you're hearing this, know that I discovered everything. Every intercepted call, every discarded letter, every lie you told to keep Marcus away from me. I know about the time you told him I said I never wanted to see him again. I know about the funeral plans you made without consulting him. I know about the new will you encouraged me to write, cutting him out entirely. Victoria made a choking sound and Marcus realized she was crying, not from remorse, but from the terror of being caught. She had overplayed her hand, and now everything was crumbling around her. But here's what you didn't know, Robert's voice continued with grim satisfaction. I've been watching and learning. Every time you thought you were manipulating me, I was documenting your behavior. Every time you badmouthed Marcus or encouraged me to move on from my grief over my first wife, I was taking notes. The recording continued, and Robert's voice took on a tone of quiet satisfaction that sent chills through the room. So I decided to give you exactly what you wanted. I rewrote my will, leaving you the house and the business, just as you repeatedly suggested. I played the part of the manipulated old fool, nodding along when you talked about new beginnings and leaving the past behind. I even agreed when you said Marcus had made his choice to stay away. Bradley finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Dad, we were just trying to protect you. Marcus was angry and bitter. Shut up and listen. Robert's recorded voice cut him off sharply. Because here's what you never understood about me, or about the business I built from nothing. I'm not a fool, and I don't forgive betrayal easily. While you were congratulating yourselves on your clever manipulation, I was ensuring that the son you tried to steal from me would receive what he truly deserved. Victoria was openly sobbing now, her composed facade completely shattered. "Robert, please," she whispered to the recorder, as if her dead husband could somehow hear her. "We loved you. Everything we did was because we loved you." "Love," Robert's voice carried a bitter laugh. "You loved my money and my status. You loved the idea of being a successful businessman's wife and sons. But you never loved me enough to let me have a relationship with my own child. You saw Marcus as a threat to your inheritance, so you systematically destroyed his relationship with me." Mr. Whitmore watched the family's disintegration with professional detachment, though Marcus caught a glimpse of satisfaction in the elderly lawyer's eyes. Clearly, he had seen enough estate disputes to recognize manipulation when he encountered it. "The Swiss account represents more than just money," Robert continued. "Every dollar in that account was set aside during a moment when I missed my son. Every time you deflected my questions about why he never called, every time you suggested I was better off without toxic people in my life, I made another deposit. $4.7 million represents 4.7 million moments when I wished my boy was with me." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of finally understanding that his father had never stopped loving him. The man's voice from beyond the grave was giving him the greatest gift possible, the knowledge that he had been wanted, missed, and loved. "But the money is just the beginning," Robert's voice continued, and Marcus detected a note of cold satisfaction that made him sit up straighter. Because I also spent the last 2 years preparing a few other surprises for my dear family. You see, when you systematically deceive someone, you should make sure they're not smarter than you are. Preston and Bradley exchanged terrified glances. What else had their stepfather discovered? What other secrets had he uncovered during his investigation? Victoria, you might want to check your credit cards, Robert's voice suggested with icy politeness. Victoria's hands trembled as she fumbled for her purse, pulling out her wallet with shaking fingers. She extracted several credit cards, her face growing paler as she stared at them. "What did you do?" she whispered, though she was addressing a dead man who couldn't answer. "I canceled them this morning," Robert's voice explained calmly. "All of them. The joint accounts, the credit lines, even the household expense account. You see, I realized that a woman who would steal a father's relationship with his son might also be capable of other forms of theft." The recorder crackled slightly as Robert paused. "I also had forensic accountants examine our finances for the past 15 years. Mr. Whitmore reached into his briefcase yet again, producing a thick manila folder. "Your husband's investigators discovered some interesting irregularities," he said, addressing Victoria directly. "Unauthorized transfers, forged signatures on business documents, and several loans taken against company equipment without proper authorization." Bradley shot to his feet so quickly his chair toppled backward. "That's impossible. We never—" He stopped abruptly, realizing his words were essentially a confession. Preston grabbed his twin's arm, trying to pull him back down, but the damage was already done. "Never what?" Marcus asked quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Never forged Dad's signature, never took unauthorized loans, never systematically stole from him while keeping me away so I couldn't witness what you were doing." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture of deception far worse than he had imagined. Victoria was frantically dialing her phone, probably trying to access her bank accounts. Her increasingly frantic expressions confirmed what Robert's voice had already revealed. She was financially cut off, trapped with no access to the money she had counted on. "The business you boys are so excited to inherit," Robert's recording continued, "is currently under investigation by the State Attorney General's Office for Fraud. It seems someone has been inflating contract bids, skimming money from client payments, and using company equipment as collateral for personal loans. The whole operation is about to be shut down pending a full audit." Preston made a sound like a wounded animal. "Mom, what did you do?" he whispered, staring at Victoria with growing horror. "You told us you were just managing the paperwork, helping Dad with the boring financial stuff." "I was protecting our family," Victoria snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. Marcus had already taken Robert away from us once, his precious dead wife's perfect son. I wasn't going to let him come back and take our security too. Her voice rose to a near shriek. Everything I did was to protect what we built together. What you built was a house of lies, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was experiencing. You didn't just steal money from Dad. You stole his relationship with me, and you stole my relationship with him. That's worth more than any amount of money. Robert's voice from the recorder seemed to agree. Marcus, if you're hearing this, know that discovering the truth about what happened between us was the most important thing I ever did. These people robbed us of years we can never get back, but they can't touch the love I always felt for you. The recording wasn't finished. Robert's voice continued with methodical precision, like a man delivering a carefully planned business presentation. Victoria, the house you're so fond of, the one you just inherited, has a rather substantial second mortgage that you're probably not aware of. I took it out 6 months ago, using the equity to make final contributions to Marcus's trust fund. Victoria's phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering on the hardwood floor. "How much?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper. $600,000, Robert's voice replied cheerfully. "The monthly payments are quite reasonable, only about $4,000 a month. Of course, that assumes you have income to make the payments. Since the business is being shut down and your credit cards are canceled, that might prove challenging." Bradley was packing now, running his hands through his hair in growing panic. "This can't be legal," he kept muttering. "You can't just destroy people's lives from beyond the grave. There have to be laws against this." Mr. Whitmore adjusted his glasses and consulted his notes. "Actually, your stepfather acted entirely within his legal rights. As the primary owner of the business and the sole name on the house deed, he was free to manage his assets as he saw fit. The forensic accounting was perfectly legal, as was reporting suspected fraud to the authorities." "But the timing," Preston protested weakly. "He waited until after he died to destroy us. That's cruel." "Cruel?" Marcus stood up, his patience finally exhausted. "You want to talk about cruel? Cruel is telling a dying man that his son doesn't want to see him. Cruel is intercepting phone calls from someone trying to reconcile with his father. Cruel is making me believe my dad had rejected me when he was actually trying to reach out." His voice grew stronger with each word. "You didn't just lie to him. You lied to me. You made me spend the last 5 years thinking my father died hating me." The truth of it hit him fully for the first time, and Marcus felt a rage he had never experienced before. These people hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen time, love, forgiveness, and the chance for a relationship that could never be recovered. Victoria seemed to rally slightly, drawing on reserves of manipulation she had perfected over decades. "Marcus, sweetheart," she said, her voice taking on the false sweetness he remembered from his teenage years. "Surely you can see that we're family now. We all made mistakes, but we can work together. That money in Switzerland, it's more than enough for all of us to live comfortably. We could split it fairly, and everyone would benefit." The sheer audacity of her suggestion left Marcus speechless for a moment. Even now, with her lies exposed and her crimes revealed, she was still trying to manipulate him, still trying to get her hands on money that had never belonged to her. "You're not my family," Marcus said quietly. "You never were. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie to keep people apart. And family sure as hell doesn't spend 15 years systematically destroying relationships for personal gain." Robert's voice from the recorder wasn't done with his revelations. "There's one more thing you should all know," he said, and Marcus could almost hear the smile in his father's voice. "The private investigator I hired didn't just document your lies and theft. He also recorded several of your conversations about Marcus and about your plans for my money after I died." The color drained from Victoria's face so completely that Marcus thought she might faint. Bradley and Preston looked at each other in terror, both clearly remembering conversations they thought had been private. "Victoria, you might remember the discussion you had with your sister last Christmas, when you said you were counting the days until I died so you could finally get rid of Marcus's ghost and enjoy your inheritance. Or perhaps the conversation with your financial advisor about how you plan to contest any will that left Marcus anything significant." Victoria made a sound like a wounded animal. Those conversations had taken place in her own home, in what she thought was complete privacy. The idea that they had been recorded was devastating. "Boys," Robert continued, addressing his stepsons, "you might recall the evening you spent calculating how much my business was worth and discussing whether it would be worth the trouble to keep Marcus around for appearances after I died. Preston, I particularly enjoyed your comment about how you'd make sure the freak knew he wasn't welcome at family gatherings." Preston was openly weeping now, the full weight of his stepfather's investigation crushing down on him. Everything they had said and done in private had been documented, recorded, and preserved for this moment. "These recordings," Robert's voice continued with satisfaction, "have been provided to the State Attorney General's office as part of their fraud investigation. They establish motive and demonstrate a pattern of deception that goes far beyond simple financial crimes." Mr. Whitmore opened another folder, revealing what appeared to be legal documents with official seals. "The Attorney General's office has issued warrants for the arrest of all 3 family members on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Victoria began hyperventilating, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Bradley and Preston sat in stunned silence, the full scope of their legal jeopardy finally becoming clear. "Elder abuse," Bradley whispered. "But Dad wasn't. We never hurt him physically." Emotional and financial abuse of elderly individuals is a serious felony, Mr. Whitmore explained calmly. Isolating a person from their family members, manipulating their financial decisions, and systematically deceiving them about their relationships constitutes criminal behavior under state law. Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of him was satisfied to see justice being served, but another part of him was simply exhausted by the scope of the betrayal. These people had stolen years of his life, poisoned his relationship with his father, and committed crimes that would likely send them to prison. "The recordings will be played at your trial," Robert's voice concluded. "I wanted Marcus to hear them first, so he would understand exactly what happened and why. Son, I hope you can forgive me for not seeing through their lies sooner." As the recording ended, the office fell into complete silence except for Victoria's ragged breathing and the soft ticking of the antique clock. Marcus stared at the small device that had just revealed the full scope of his family's betrayal, processing emotions he didn't have names for. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat and began gathering the papers spread across his desk. "Marcus, there are some practical matters we need to discuss regarding accessing your Swiss account. The bank will require several forms of identification and specific documentation, which I have prepared for you." He slid a leather portfolio across the desk. "I've also taken the liberty of contacting a reputable financial advisor who specializes in international accounts." Victoria suddenly lurched forward, desperation making her voice crack. "Wait, you can't just let them arrest us. Marcus, please. I know we made mistakes, but we're still family. We can work this out privately. You could help us with the legal fees and we could make amends." "Mistakes," Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You call 15 years of systematic deception and theft a mistake." He stood up, and for the first time in his adult life he felt truly powerful. "You destroyed my relationship with my father. You made me believe he didn't love me. You stole money from him while convincing him I didn't want to see him. Those aren't mistakes. Those are choices." Bradley tried a different approach, his voice taking on a pleading tone. "Look, we know we screwed up, but think about what sending us to prison will accomplish. It won't bring Uncle Robert back and it won't give you those years with him. But if you help us now, we could be a real family." "We were never a family," Marcus cut him off. "And after what I've learned today, we never could be. You're criminals. You exploited an elderly man's grief and loneliness for financial gain. You kept a son from his dying father and a father from his son. There's no coming back from that." Preston made one last desperate attempt. The business, you could take it over, run it honestly. We could work for you, make up for what we did. The business is being shut down by the state, Marcus reminded him. And even if it weren't, I wouldn't want anything touched by your corruption. He turned to Mr. Whitmore. What happens now? The lawyer consulted his watch. The authorities should be arriving within the next few minutes. Your step-family members will be taken into custody pending arraignment. Their assets will be frozen as part of the investigation, though given the mortgage situation and canceled credit, there may not be much to freeze. As if summoned by his words, there was a knock at the office door. Through the frosted glass, Marcus could see the shapes of several people in uniform. Victoria began crying harder, her composure finally completely shattered. "Marcus," she whispered, reaching toward him with trembling hands, "please don't let them destroy us. I know I was wrong, but I loved Robert in my own way. I was just so afraid of losing him, of being poor again." "You were afraid of losing money that was never yours," Marcus replied, stepping away from her reaching hands. "And in your greed, you lost everything else." The door opened, and 3 police officers entered the law office, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. The lead officer, a middle-aged woman with sergeant's stripes, approached Mr. Whitmore with professional courtesy. "Sergeant Martinez," she introduced herself. "We're here for Victoria Thompson, Bradley Thompson, and Preston Thompson." She glanced around the room, taking in the tear-stained faces and obvious tension. "I assume those would be the 3 individuals near the back of the room." Mr. Whitmore nodded. "That's correct. I believe you have the documentation regarding the charges." He handed over a thick folder that had been prepared in advance, containing copies of the financial evidence and recorded conversations. Victoria tried one final time to appeal to Marcus, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, Marcus, I know I hurt you, but I'm begging you, don't let this happen. Think about what Robert would have wanted. He loved us too in his way. He wouldn't have wanted to see us destroyed." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman who had once seemed so sophisticated and glamorous when she first entered his father's life. Now she just looked pathetic and small, her mask of respectability stripped away to reveal the greedy, manipulative person underneath. "Dad spent 2 years documenting your crimes and planning this moment," Marcus said quietly. "If he didn't want it to happen, he wouldn't have arranged it. You destroyed yourselves through your own choices." He turned away from her as the officers began reading the Miranda rights, calling lawyers and how this was all a misunderstanding, while Preston simply stared at the floor in defeated silence. Victoria required more effort, as she alternately pleaded and threatened, her voice growing more shrill as the reality of her situation sank in. "You'll regret this," she screamed at Marcus as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. That money will never bring you happiness. You're destroying a family over greed. You're just like your father, cold and heartless." Her words echoed in the law office as the officers led her toward the door. Marcus felt the insults wash over him without impact. After years of psychological manipulation, her desperate attempts to wound him felt powerless. He had something now that she could never take away: the knowledge that his father had loved him, had fought for him, and had spent his final years trying to make amends for the time they had lost. Sergeant Martinez approached Marcus before leaving. "Sir, you'll likely be called to testify at their trial. The district attorney's office will be in touch to schedule a deposition." She handed him her business card. "If you have any concerns about your safety or if they attempt to contact you from jail, please call me immediately." The warning sent a chill through Marcus. He hadn't considered that Victoria and her sons might try to retaliate somehow, even from prison. The sergeant seemed to read his thoughts. "Don't worry too much," she said reassuringly. "Financial crimes like this usually result in plea bargains rather than trials, especially with the evidence your father collected. They'll probably be more focused on minimizing their prison time than on revenge." She glanced toward the door where her colleagues were leading the prisoners away. "Though I'd recommend changing your phone number and being cautious about your address for a while." As the police and their prisoners departed, the law office fell quiet except for the whispered conversations of the remaining beneficiaries, who were clearly eager to leave this family drama behind them. Marcus found himself alone with Mr. Whitmore, the weight of everything that had happened settling over him like a heavy blanket. "I imagine this has been quite overwhelming," the elderly lawyer said gently, his professional demeanor softening now that the official business was concluded. "Your father spoke of you often during our meetings over the past 2 years. He was very proud of the man you'd become, despite the obstacles placed in your path." Marcus felt fresh tears threatening. "I just wish I'd known sooner. I wasted so much time being angry at him, thinking he'd chosen them over me. If I'd just tried harder to reach him." "Your father never blamed you," Mr. Whitmore interrupted firmly. "He understood exactly what had happened and why. That's why he was so methodical in his planning. He wanted to ensure that the truth came out and that justice was served." Mr. Whitmore opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small wooden box, its surface polished smooth by years of handling. "Your father asked me to give you this after everything else was settled." He placed it gently on the desk between them. Marcus recognized the box immediately. It had sat on his father's dresser throughout his childhood, containing what his father had always called his most important treasures. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the lid, revealing a collection of items that made his breath catch in his throat. There was his mother's wedding ring, the simple gold band she had worn every day until her death. Beneath it lay a small stack of photographs, pictures of Marcus as a child, his parents' wedding photo, family Christmas mornings, and other moments from their life together before cancer changed everything. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of paper, yellow with age. Marcus unfolded the paper carefully, recognizing his own childish handwriting from when he was perhaps 8 years old. It was a Father's Day card he had made in school, complete with crayon drawings and a poem about his dad being his hero. He had completely forgotten about it, but his father had kept it for nearly 20 years. He looked at that card every night, Mr. Whitmore said softly, especially during the difficult times when he was questioning his decisions about his new family. It reminded him of who you really were versus the bitter, ungrateful person they tried to convince him you had become. The simple gesture broke through Marcus's composure completely. He wept for the father he had lost twice, once to his stepfamily's manipulation and again to death. He wept for the years they could never recover and the words they would never get to say to each other. But most of all, he wept with relief that his father had never stopped loving him. When his tears finally subsided, Mr. Whitmore handed him a tissue and continued with the practical matters. The Swiss bank has been expecting your contact. I've prepared all the necessary documentation, including death certificates, DNA verification, and legal authentication of your identity. They're quite accustomed to handling sensitive family situations. Marcus nodded, still processing the magnitude of his inheritance. $4.7 million was more money than he had ever imagined having, but it felt strange to celebrate when it had come from such pain and deception. "What should I do with it?" he asked, feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility. "I'm a mechanic. I live in a studio apartment and drive a 15-year-old truck. I don't know anything about managing that kind of money." Mr. Whitmore smiled, the first genuine warmth Marcus had seen from him all day. "Your father anticipated that question. He suggested that you take some time to grieve and process what you've learned before making any major decisions. The money has been growing steadily for 30 years. It can wait a little longer while you figure out what you want to do with your life." He handed Marcus another business card. "This is Sarah Chen, a financial advisor who specializes in helping people who come into sudden wealth. She's discreet, ethical, and very good at what she does. Your father interviewed several advisors before choosing her." Marcus spent the next several hours in Mr. Whitmore's office, signing documents and learning about the complex process of accessing his Swiss inheritance. The lawyer had been thorough in his preparations, anticipating every possible complication and preparing solutions in advance. "Your father was quite concerned about your safety once this became public," Mr. Whitmore explained as he handed Marcus a thick packet of information. Large inheritances can attract unwanted attention. Fraudsters, long-lost relatives, and investment scammers all seem to appear when someone comes into significant money. The packet contained recommendations for security companies, advice on protecting his privacy, and contact information for attorneys who specialized in inheritance law. Marcus realized his father had thought of everything, even trying to protect him from dangers he might not have anticipated. "There's one more thing," Mr. Whitmore said, reaching into his safe and withdrawing a sealed envelope marked with Marcus's name in his father's handwriting. "He asked me to give you this only if you seemed ready to handle it emotionally. It contains some additional information about your stepfamily that he discovered during his investigation." Marcus hesitated, wondering if he could handle any more revelations. The day had already been overwhelming, and he wasn't sure he was ready for additional shocks. But his curiosity ultimately won out, and he accepted the envelope. Inside was a detailed report from the private investigator, complete with photographs, financial records, and transcripts of recorded conversations. As Marcus read, he discovered that Victoria's deception went back even further than he had realized. She had actually targeted his father deliberately, researching his financial situation and emotional vulnerabilities before engineering their chance meeting at a grief support group. The report revealed that Victoria had done this before. She had married two other wealthy widowers, systematically isolated them from their families, and inherited substantial sums when they died. Bradley and Preston weren't even her biological sons, but rather the children of her first husband, whom she had trained to help with her schemes. "She's a professional," Marcus said quietly, feeling sick as he read the details. This wasn't just greed or jealousy, it was a calculated con game. Mr. Whitmore nodded grimly. "Your father was devastated when he learned the truth about who he had married, but he was also relieved to understand that his judgment hadn't been as poor as he'd thought. She was very skilled at manipulation, skilled enough to fool a successful businessman for 15 years. The revelation added another layer to Marcus's understanding of what had happened. His father hadn't just been a lonely widower who made poor choices about remarriage. He had been the victim of a sophisticated predator who specialized in exploiting grieving men. "Will this information help with their prosecution?" Marcus asked, still reading through the investigator's findings. "Absolutely. The pattern of behavior establishes this as career criminal activity rather than isolated incidents. The Attorney General's office expects the sentences to be quite severe, especially for Victoria." Mr. Whitmore began gathering the papers on his desk. "Your father spent considerable money on this investigation, but he felt it was necessary to ensure they couldn't victimize anyone else." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself emotionally exhausted but oddly peaceful. The truth, however painful, was better than the uncertainty and self-doubt he had lived with for years. He finally understood that his father's rejection had been manufactured by people who saw him as an obstacle to their financial plans. "I keep thinking about all the things I wanted to say to him," Marcus told Mr. Whitmore as they prepared to leave the office. "All the conversations we never got to have, the apologies I wanted to make for being so stubborn and angry." The elderly lawyer paused in his packing and looked at Marcus with understanding eyes. "Your father knew you loved him. Despite everything that happened, despite the years of separation, he never doubted that. That's why he fought so hard to leave you this inheritance. Not just the money, but the truth about what really happened." Marcus carefully placed his father's treasures back in the wooden box, along with the key to the Swiss account and all the legal documents. Everything fit perfectly, as if his father had planned even this small detail. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. His past, present, and future all contained in one small container. "What happens to the house and the business?" Marcus asked as they walked toward the office door. "The house will likely be sold to pay the mortgage and legal fees. The business assets will be liquidated to compensate the clients who were defrauded." Mr. Whitmore held the door open for Marcus. "There won't be much left by the time the lawyers and courts are finished. Your stepfamily will emerge from prison with essentially nothing." The justice of it satisfied something deep in Marcus's soul. They had spent years stealing from his father and destroying relationships for money, and now they would lose everything they had schemed to obtain. Meanwhile, the son they had tried to disinherit would receive an inheritance beyond their wildest dreams. As they walked through the building's lobby, Mr. Whitmore handed Marcus one final document. "Your father's last letter," he explained. "He wrote it the night before he died, when he knew the end was near. He asked me to give it to you after everything else was settled." Marcus accepted the letter with trembling hands but didn't open it immediately. He wasn't ready to hear his father's final words, not yet. There had been too many revelations, too many emotions for one day. The letter would wait until he was home in private, where he could process whatever message his father had left for him. "Thank you," Marcus said simply, shaking the lawyer's hand, "for everything you did for him and for me. I know this couldn't have been easy to arrange." Mr. Whitmore smiled, and Marcus saw genuine affection in the old man's eyes. "Your father was a good man who made some poor choices after a devastating loss, but he spent his final years trying to make things right. It was an honor to help him do that." They parted ways in the parking lot, and Marcus sat in his truck for several minutes, holding his father's final letter and trying to process everything that had happened. Marcus drove home slowly, his mind reeling from the day's revelations. His small studio apartment had never felt more humble than it did now, knowing he was suddenly worth nearly $5 million. But the money seemed almost irrelevant compared to the emotional weight of what he had learned about his father's love and his stepfamily's betrayal. He placed the wooden box on his small kitchen table and made himself a cup of coffee, needing the familiar ritual to ground himself in reality. The events at the lawyer's office felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. He kept expecting to wake up and discover it had all been an elaborate dream. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Marcus felt a moment of panic, wondering if somehow Victoria or her sons had managed to contact him from jail. But the message was from his supervisor at the garage where he worked, asking if he was feeling better since he had called in sick that morning. Marcus had completely forgotten about his job, about the normal life he had been living just hours earlier. He typed back a brief response, saying he was still unwell and would need a few more days off. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was texting about missing work as a mechanic while sitting on an inheritance that could allow him to never work again if he chose not to. Finally, when he couldn't delay any longer, Marcus opened his father's final letter. The handwriting was shaky but legible, clearly written by a man in the final stages of illness, but determined to say what needed to be said. "My dear son," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then everything I planned has worked out as I hoped. By now you know the truth about what happened between us, and I pray you can find it in your heart to forgive me for not seeing through their lies sooner." Marcus had to pause, wiping away tears that were becoming all too familiar. His father's words continued, "I want you to know that not a day passed that I didn't think about you, didn't miss you, didn't wish I could undo the mistakes I made after your mother died. I was so lost in my grief that I couldn't see what was happening until it was almost too late." The letter went on to explain his father's investigation, his growing horror at discovering the extent of the deception, and his determination to ensure that Marcus would eventually learn the truth. But it was the final paragraph that broke Marcus's heart completely. "I know I can't give you back the years we lost, but I hope this inheritance will give you the freedom to live the life your mother and I always dreamed you would have. Don't let anger consume you the way it did me. Use this gift to build something beautiful, something that would make us both proud. And know that wherever I am now, I'm with your mother again, and we're both watching over you with more love than you can imagine." Marcus sat in his quiet apartment, holding his father's words and feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The anger and resentment he had carried for so long seemed to dissolve, replaced by a deep sense of connection to the man who had never stopped loving him, even when he couldn't show it. The next morning, Marcus called the financial advisor his father had chosen, Sarah Chen, and arranged to meet with her later that week. He also contacted the Swiss bank, beginning the process of accessing his inheritance. The bank representative was professional and discreet, explaining that such situations were more common than Marcus might think. "We see this frequently," the banker explained during their phone conversation. "Parents who establish trusts for children during difficult family situations. Your father was very thorough in his documentation and planning. The transfer should be straightforward once we verify your identity." Marcus spent the day researching financial advisors and inheritance management, trying to educate himself about a world he had never expected to enter. The more he learned, the more he appreciated his father's careful planning. Without proper guidance, sudden wealth could be as destructive as poverty. His phone rang around noon, and he was surprised to see Mr. Whitmore's number on the caller ID. "Marcus," the lawyer said, "I wanted to let you know that Victoria and her sons have been formally charged. The district attorney's office is quite confident about their case, given the evidence your father collected." He paused. "There's also been an interesting development. Victoria's previous husbands, the ones she was married to before your father, their children have come forward." Marcus felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "It seems the investigators' report reached the right people. The adult children of Victoria's previous victims have been trying to prove their suspicions about their stepmother for years. Your father's evidence has given them the proof they needed to reopen their father's cases." The scope of Victoria's crimes was apparently even larger than Marcus had realized. She had been operating this scheme for decades, systematically targeting and exploiting grieving widowers. His father hadn't just been one victim. He had been part of a pattern that had destroyed multiple families. "They want to thank you," Mr. Whitmore continued. "Your father's investigation has given them closure they never thought they'd get. One of them, a woman named Jennifer Morrison, asked if she could contact you. Her father was Victoria's first husband, and she's been fighting to prove Victoria killed him for 20 years." Marcus agreed to the contact, feeling a strange sense of kinship with other people who had been victimized by his step-family. It was oddly comforting to know he wasn't alone in his experience, that other children had suffered similar losses at Victoria's hands. When Jennifer Morrison called that evening, Marcus was struck by the similarities in their stories. Victoria had used the same tactics, told the same lies, and created the same divisions between her victims and their children. "Your father was braver than mine," Jennifer said during their conversation. "He figured out what was happening and fought back. My dad never realized what she was until it was too late." She paused, her voice heavy with old grief. "At least now we can make sure she never does this to anyone else." Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself at the center of a growing investigation that spanned multiple states and decades. Victoria's pattern of targeting wealthy widowers had left a trail of destroyed families and suspicious deaths that law enforcement was now examining with fresh eyes. The media attention was overwhelming. Local news stations picked up the story, fascinated by the tale of a son who discovered his father's love through a Swiss bank account and a stepfamily's arrest. Marcus declined all interview requests, but the story spread anyway, attracting the attention of true crime podcasters and investigative journalists. Sarah Chen, the financial advisor, proved to be exactly what Marcus needed: competent, ethical, and experienced in helping people navigate sudden wealth. During their first meeting, she helped him understand the reality of his situation. $4.7 million is substantial, but it's not infinite, she explained, showing him projections and investment strategies. Managed properly, it can provide you with financial security for life and allow you to be generous with causes you care about. Managed poorly, it could be gone in a few years. Marcus appreciated her honesty. He had been worried about advisors who might try to flatter him or oversell risky investments. Sarah treated the money with the respect it deserved while keeping him grounded in reality. "What did your father do for work?" she asked during their planning session. "He was a contractor," Marcus replied. "He built things, houses, commercial buildings, renovations. He always said there was dignity in creating something useful with your hands." Sarah smiled. "That tells me something about his values and probably yours too. We should think about investments that align with those values, companies that build things, create jobs, contribute to their communities." The conversation helped Marcus begin to see his inheritance not just as money, but as a tool for creating the kind of life his parents would have been proud of. He didn't want to waste it on luxury or status symbols. He wanted to use it to build something meaningful. His first major decision was to quit his job at the garage, but not in the way most people might expect. Instead of simply walking away, he used part of his inheritance to buy the business from his retiring boss, keeping all his former coworkers employed and giving himself a purpose beyond just managing his wealth. "You sure about this?" his former supervisor, Mike, asked when Marcus explained his plans. "You could retire, travel the world, never work again." "My dad spent 30 years building something," Marcus replied, looking around the garage that would soon be his. "I want to build something too, something that creates jobs and serves the community. I think he'd approve." Mike grinned and shook his hand. "Boss, I think your old man would be proud as hell." 6 months after that life-changing day in Mr. Whitmore's office, Marcus stood in the workshop behind his newly purchased garage, working on a classic car restoration project. The business was thriving under his ownership. He had invested in new equipment, raised wages, and expanded their services to include custom restoration work. The legal proceedings against Victoria and her sons had concluded with guilty pleas and substantial prison sentences. Victoria received 15 years for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy charges across multiple states. Bradley and Preston each received 8 years, though they might be eligible for parole in 5 with good behavior. Marcus had attended their sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because he felt he owed it to his father to see justice served. Victoria had looked older and smaller than he remembered, her carefully maintained appearance replaced by the gray uniform of the county jail. She had glanced at him once during the proceedings, but there was no recognition in her eyes, just the empty stare of someone whose schemes had finally collapsed. The house where Marcus had grown up had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution to the business clients who had been defrauded. Marcus had briefly considered buying it himself, but ultimately decided that some chapters were better left closed. The house held too many painful memories of feeling unwelcome in his own home. Instead, he had purchased a modest house in a different part of town, nothing extravagant but comfortable and his own. He had filled it with photos of his parents, the wooden box from his father's desk, and mementos from their life together before everything went wrong. The Swiss account had been transferred without complications, and Sarah Chen had helped him invest most of it conservatively, while keeping enough liquid to fund his business expansion and charitable giving. Marcus had established a small foundation that provided scholarships for children who had lost parents, understanding firsthand how grief could derail a young person's future. He had also reached out to some of his father's former employees, several of whom had been let go when the business was shut down. Marcus hired them for his restoration projects, and they shared stories about his father that helped fill in the missing years of their relationship. "Your dad used to talk about you all the time," one of the older workers, Tommy, had told him. "Even when that woman tried to shut him up, he'd find ways to bring you into conversations. He kept photos of you in his toolbox, showed them to anyone who'd look." These revelations continued to heal wounds Marcus hadn't even realized were still bleeding. Each story, each memory shared by someone who had known his father, helped reconstruct the relationship that Victoria had tried to destroy. The private investigator's report had also revealed something that gave Marcus deep satisfaction. His father had been secretly contributing to Marcus's mother's favorite charity for years, making donations in her memory every year on the anniversary of her death. The charity, which provided support to families dealing with cancer, had received over $100,000 over the years, money that Victoria had never known about. On the first anniversary of his father's death, Marcus made a pilgrimage to the cemetery where both his parents were buried. He brought fresh flowers for both graves and spent the afternoon sitting between them, telling them about everything that had happened over the past year. "I bought the garage, Dad," he said aloud, feeling only slightly self-conscious about talking to a headstone. "Tommy and Louis are working for me now, and they still tell stories about the crazy things you used to do on job sites." He smiled, remembering some of the tales. "I'm trying to run it the way you would have: fair wages, honest work, treating people with respect." He told them about the foundation, about the legal proceedings, about his plans to expand the business to include training programs for young people who wanted to learn trades. The afternoon sun was warm on his face, and for the first time since his mother's death, Marcus felt truly at peace. As he prepared to leave, he noticed someone approaching from across the cemetery. It was Mr. Whitmore, carrying his own small bouquet of flowers. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," the elderly lawyer said. "I've been visiting your father's grave regularly since the funeral. He was more than just a client. He became a friend during those final years." Marcus was touched by the gesture. "He chose his allies well," he said. "I don't think any of this would have worked without your help." Mr. Whitmore placed his flowers on Robert's grave and stood quietly for a moment. "Your father was determined to make things right. I've been practicing law for nearly 40 years, and I've never seen someone plan so meticulously to ensure justice was served and love was preserved." They walked back toward the parking lot together, two men connected by their shared affection for someone who was gone but not forgotten. "Have you heard from any of Victoria's other victims lately?" Marcus asked. "Jennifer Morrison and the others have formed a support group," Mr. Whitmore replied. "They're working with law enforcement to identify other potential victims and prevent future crimes. Your father's investigation has helped them save several other families from similar situations." The knowledge that his father's final act had protected other people from Victoria's schemes added another layer of meaning to everything that had happened. Robert Thompson's investigation hadn't just restored his relationship with his son. It had prevented other sons and daughters from losing their fathers to a predator's manipulation. As they reached their cars, Mr. Whitmore handed Marcus a business card. "I'm retiring next month," he said, "but I wanted you to have my personal contact information. If you ever need anything, legal advice, someone to talk to, or just an old man's perspective on life, please don't hesitate to call." Marcus pocketed the card gratefully. "Thank you for everything you did for him and for me. I know he chose the right person to handle this." 2 years after inheriting his father's Swiss account, Marcus had transformed both his life and his business in ways he never could have imagined. The garage had expanded to include a training center where young people could learn automotive skills, funded by his foundation, and staffed by experienced mechanics who donated their time. He had also quietly helped several families facing financial hardship due to medical expenses, remembering his own family's struggles during his mother's illness. The gifts were always anonymous, arranged through Sarah Chen's firm, but Marcus found deep satisfaction in knowing he was using his father's money to ease other people's burdens. The media attention had finally died down, allowing Marcus to live a relatively normal life. He had even started dating someone, a teacher named Amy who worked at the local high school and shared his values about community service and honest work. She knew about his inheritance, but seemed more interested in his character than his bank account. "You're not what I expected from someone who inherited millions," she had told him early in their relationship. "What did you expect?" Marcus had asked. "I don't know, expensive cars, fancy clothes, arrogance maybe," she smiled. "Instead, I got a guy who still drives a pickup truck and gets excited about teaching kids how to change oil." Marcus laughed. "My parents raised me to believe that money should be a tool, not a master. I'm just trying to use it the way they would have wanted." The foundation had grown beyond his initial vision, now providing not just scholarships, but also direct support to families dealing with various crises. Marcus had learned that his mother's death from cancer wasn't unique. Many families faced similar struggles with medical debt and emotional trauma. His foundation's work felt like a continuation of his parents' values. He had also maintained contact with the other children of Victoria's victims, forming an unexpected but meaningful support network of people who understood the unique pain of having a parent manipulated and isolated by a professional predator. They met annually, sharing updates on their lives and their continued efforts to prevent similar crimes. Jennifer Morrison had become particularly close to Marcus, their shared experience creating a bond stronger than many biological relationships. She had used evidence from his father's investigation to finally get justice for her own father's death, which was now being investigated as a potential homicide. "Your dad saved my family too," she told Marcus during one of their calls. "We spent 20 years wondering if we were crazy, if we were imagining things about Victoria. Your father's evidence proved we were right all along." The ripple effects of Robert Thompson's final investigation continued to spread, touching lives and serving justice in ways he probably never imagined when he first hired that private investigator. On a quiet Sunday evening, Marcus sat in his home office, reviewing applications for his foundation's latest scholarship program. The applications told stories of resilience and determination that reminded him of his own journey. Young people who had faced loss, hardship, and challenges, but refused to give up on their dreams. One application particularly caught his attention. It was from a 17-year-old girl whose father had died in a construction accident, leaving her family struggling financially. She wanted to study engineering so she could improve safety standards in the construction industry. Her essay was passionate and well-written, showing both intelligence and character. Marcus approved her application immediately, knowing his father would have been proud to support someone dedicated to making construction work safer for other families. It was exactly the kind of investment Robert Thompson would have made: practical, meaningful, and focused on building something better for the future. His phone buzzed with a text from Amy, asking if he wanted to join her for dinner at a new restaurant downtown. Marcus smiled and typed back his acceptance, looking forward to sharing his evening with someone who had become increasingly important to him. As he prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the framed photo on his desk, the picture of his parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful and deeply in love. Next to it sat the wooden box his father had left him, now containing not just the original treasures but also letters from scholarship recipients, photos from foundation events, and other mementos of the life he was building. "I hope you're proud of what we've accomplished," he said softly to the photograph. "I'm trying to use your gift to build something worthy of the love you never stopped feeling for me." He grabbed his keys and headed out into the evening, feeling grateful for the second chance his father had given him. The money in the Swiss account had been important, but the real inheritance had been the knowledge that he was loved, wanted, and valued. Everything else, the business, the foundation, the life he was building, was just his way of honoring that love. Outside, the sun was setting over the town where Marcus had grown up, struggled, lost hope, and ultimately found redemption. He drove toward dinner with Amy, toward a future his parents would have been proud of, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes love finds a way to triumph even over death and deception. The last rays of sunlight caught the rearview mirror as Marcus drove away from his house, and for just a moment, he could have sworn he saw two figures standing on his front porch, smiling and waving goodbye. When he looked again, there was nothing there but shadows and fading light, but the feeling of peace and approval lingered with him all the way to the restaurant. His father's final gift hadn't just been money. It had been redemption, justice, and the chance to build a life worthy of the love that had never truly died, only been hidden for a while by people who couldn't understand its value. Now that love lived on in every scholarship awarded, every young person trained, every family helped through crisis, and every day that Marcus chose to honor his parents' memory through his actions.